It was 9:48 a.m. on the 20th of June 2001. A calm suburban street in Clear Lake, Texas, basked under a quiet summer morning. Then, the call came in a woman's voice, trembling yet eerily steady. "My children are gone," she said. "I killed them." When officers arrived, the house smelled faintly of detergent and warm air. The front door was unlocked. The television still murmured in the background, a children's cartoon frozen mid-laugh. In the hallway, water seeped slowly across the tile floor, leaving trails that led to the bathroom. Inside, the bathtub was still half filled and 5 small lives. They found her standing in the living room, hands folded, clothes damp. Her eyes were distant, as if her body remained but her mind had long departed. When asked what happened, she answered calmly, "I had to. They were not going to heaven." The officers exchanged looks: confusion, disbelief, something close to fear. It wasn't the scene of rage or chaos they had expected. It was order, deliberate, and in that order lay something far more terrifying. Within hours, the story spread across America. A mother of 5, a devoted wife, a former nurse, all her children, one by one. Neighbors described her as kind, quiet, the perfect mother. The husband, Rusty Yates, was seen collapsing on the sidewalk, screaming a name the world would soon never forget: Andrea. No one could make sense of it. How could a mother, the very symbol of love and protection, become the architect of such unimaginable tragedy? What darkness could twist a mind so completely that mercy and murder became indistinguishable? Sometimes, evil doesn't roar in the dark. Sometimes, it whispers in the voice of a mother who believes she's saving her children. Before the morning that would change everything, the Yates family seemed like any portrait of suburban serenity. Their small, beige brick house sat neatly among the identical lawns of Clear Lake, Texas, a quiet, sun-drenched neighborhood where children's laughter usually floated through the air and sprinklers hissed in the heat of summer. To anyone passing by, Andrea and Rusty Yates appeared to be a model couple living the American dream. Andrea was gentle, deliberate in her movements, and soft-spoken in every conversation. A former nurse, she had left her career to raise their children full-time. She was the kind of mother who baked cookies for Bible study and never missed a Sunday service. Her 5 children, Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and little Mary, were often seen riding their bikes up and down the street, their blonde hair glinting in the Texas sunlight. To the outside world, theirs was a home built on faith, discipline, and love. Inside, however, cracks had begun to spread long before anyone noticed. After the birth of her 4th child, Andrea fell into what doctors called postpartum depression. She began to hear whispers in her mind, dark, insistent voices that told her she was failing as a mother, that her children were doomed because of her sins. Rusty tried to help, but he didn't understand. He believed faith could heal anything. Andrea's doctor prescribed medication antipsychotics that dulled the edges of her fear, and for a time she seemed better. Smiling again, cooking again, laughing again. But the peace was fragile. Every time a new child came into her arms, the same shadows returned, darker and louder than before. Andrea would sit for hours in silence, staring into nothing, her fingers trembling slightly as she held her newborn. She told friends she felt empty, as if God had turned his back on her. One neighbor remembered seeing her walking the children in single file, eyes hollow, whispering prayers under her breath. Still, she hid it well. She was the kind of woman people described as quiet but strong. Her husband, an engineer at NASA's Johnson Space Center, often boasted that Andrea managed the entire household on her own, homeschooling the children, cooking every meal, keeping everything spotless. But beneath that perfection, the weight grew unbearable. Andrea's mind became a battlefield between devotion and despair. Her faith, once her refuge, began to twist into something else: a constant fear of sin, of damnation, of failing to protect her children's souls. Her doctor had warned Rusty, if she gets pregnant again, she might not survive it mentally or physically. But by then, the warnings had become background noise, drowned out by the couple's belief that God would decide their path. And so, baby Mary was born, the final spark in a storm already waiting to ignite. No one saw how close the breaking point had come. Neighbors waved as the Yates family passed by, never imagining that behind those closed doors, a mother's mind was quietly unraveling. In the calm before the storm, Andrea still smiled for photographs. Her children gathered around her. It was a picture of perfection, one that, within weeks, would become a symbol of tragedy. No one knew that the same hands holding her baby so gently would soon end the lives of them all. The morning of June 20th, 2001 began like countless others in the Yates home. The sun crept through thin curtains, spilling gold over the kitchen counter. The cereal bowls were still lined neatly beside the sink, spoons glinting in the quiet. Rusty kissed his wife goodbye before heading to work at NASA, telling her he would call around noon to check in. Andrea nodded, her voice small and steady. "Okay," she said. "We'll be fine." But that morning, something inside her finally fractured. When the front door closed behind Rusty, silence swallowed the house. The air hung heavy, suffocating, as Andrea stood alone in the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than usual. She walked toward the hallway where family photographs lined the wall, smiling faces, birthdays, tiny hands clutching hers. She stared at them, not with anger, but with an unbearable sorrow. The voices in her mind whispered again, insistent, persuasive. They must be saved. Their souls must be freed before it's too late. Andrea moved to the bathroom. She turned on the faucet, and water began to fill the tub, a dull, rhythmic rush. It was a sound she had heard 1,000 times before when bathing her children, but this time it was different. She waited until the water reached halfway, then turned it off. She called out softly to her firstborn, 7-year-old Noah, "Sweetheart, come here." But she didn't start with him. She began with the youngest. 6-month-old Mary was first. Andrea held her close, kissing her forehead, whispering prayers through trembling lips. She believed she was sending her baby to heaven. She placed Mary's small body gently in the water. Minutes later, she carried her out, wrapped her in a blanket, and laid her on the bed. Then she called the boys, one after another, John, Paul, Luke. Each came in without suspicion, trusting the mother they loved. One by one, she ended their lives in that same quiet room. There were no screams, only the faint sound of splashing water and the muffled sobs of a woman whose mind had split between mercy and madness. When Noah, the eldest, entered, he saw the horror. He turned to run. Andrea caught him halfway down the hall, her voice pleading, "I'm sorry." His final cry echoed briefly, then silence returned. In less than an hour, 5 children, her entire world, were gone. Andrea placed them side by side on the bed, covering their faces with sheets. She left the youngest, Mary, still in the tub, as though unable to bear finishing what she had started. At 9:48 a.m., Andrea picked up the phone and dialed 911. Her tone was calm, almost detached. "I need the police," she said. "I just killed children." The dispatcher froze, thinking it was a prank, but her voice carried no tremor of deceit, only resignation. Minutes later, sirens pierced the stillness of Clear Lake. Police and paramedics rushed through the door, finding Andrea standing in the living room, wet footprints beneath her feet. She didn't resist. She didn't cry. When an officer asked her why, she answered simply, "Because I am a bad mother. I let them fall from God. I had to save them." Outside, neighbors gathered in confusion, shielding their mouths, some whispering prayers, others unable to comprehend what they were hearing. Rusty arrived shortly after, running across the lawn before collapsing in disbelief. The sound of his wailing cut through the murmurs of the crowd, the sound of a father who had just lost everything. Inside, detectives moved carefully through the house. Children's drawings still hung on the refrigerator. A half-finished Bible lay open on the counter. The smell of baby lotion lingered faintly in the air, mixing with something colder, the scent of water and despair. That day, the entire nation froze. It wasn't just the brutality that stunned people, it was the contradiction. A mother, once the embodiment of tenderness, had become the destroyer of her own blood. For the first time in years, America wasn't asking who did it. They were asking why. And somewhere in a holding cell that evening, Andrea Yates sat alone, her wet hair clinging to her face, staring blankly at the wall. She whispered to herself over and over, "They're safe now. They're with God." But in the silence that followed, even she seemed unsure if heaven could hear her anymore. In the days that followed, the Yates home became a shrine of horror. Reporters crowded outside the small house in Clear Lake, their cameras aimed at the front door as investigators came and went. Every news broadcast in America repeated the same headline: "Mother kills her 5 children." The nation wanted answers, but none of them would come easily. Inside the Houston Police Department, detectives faced a case that defied comprehension. There was no motive in the usual sense, no jealousy, no rage, no insurance money. Andrea Yates had confessed freely. Yet her words made little sense. She said again and again, her tone unwavering. They were not right. They were going to hell. I had to save them. Her calmness disturbed even the most seasoned investigators. One detective later said, "She wasn't hysterical. She wasn't detached. She was convinced." It was the conviction of someone who had crossed a line between reality and delusion and could no longer tell the difference. The initial interviews revealed a timeline of escalating warning signs that had been ignored. Medical records showed multiple hospitalizations for postpartum psychosis, a rare but devastating disorder. Andrea had been prescribed antipsychotic medication, but in the weeks before the murders, her husband had encouraged her to stop taking it. She seemed better, he said later. I thought Faith could do the rest. Investigators soon realized this was not a story of sudden violence. It was a slow collapse, years in the making. Doctors, family members, even clergy had all seen pieces of the puzzle, but no one had connected them in time. When psychiatrists were brought in to evaluate her, they found a woman consumed by religious delusion. She believed she was marked by Satan, that her children were because of her sins. To save them, she thought, she had to send them to God first. It was a logic only madness could create a perverse inversion of love. Detectives found journals hidden in her bedroom, filled with verses from the Bible, each one twisted into warnings of damnation. One entry read, "Better to live in grace than let them fall to darkness." The handwriting was tight, uneven, frantic, the scrawl of a mind at war with itself. Public reaction was fierce and divided. Some saw her as a monster, the mother from hell. They called her while others saw something more tragic. A woman destroyed by illness, by isolation, by a faith that had become her prison. Churches held vigils for the children, and yet, in hushed corners, people whispered about whether Andrea herself deserved compassion. The turning point came when psychiatrist Dr. Philip Resnick took the stand during the investigation. He explained that Andrea was suffering from one of the most severe cases of postpartum psychosis ever recorded, a condition that could distort reality so profoundly that a person could no longer distinguish salvation from destruction. His words changed the trajectory of the case. Still, the prosecution refused to yield. She knew right from wrong, the district attorney argued. She waited until her husband left for work. She called 911. That is not insanity. That is calculation. But those who sat with her day after day inside the interrogation room saw something else. They saw a woman who barely spoke, whose eyes followed invisible figures only she could see, whose lips moved in silent prayer for the children she believed were now angels. The investigation slowly became less about evidence and more about understanding the mind that had birthed such horror. What made it so haunting was not evil but sincerity. Andrea truly believed she was doing the right thing. By the time detectives closed their report, one question lingered over every page. If a person's mind is broken beyond reason, are they still guilty? That question would follow Andrea Yates into the courtroom, where the line between madness and murder would be tested in front of the entire world. The trial of Andrea Yates began in early 2002 under an avalanche of cameras and public outrage. The courtroom in Houston brimmed with reporters, victims' advocates, and onlookers hungry for justice. Every seat was filled, every headline sharpened into a single question that seemed to echo across the nation. Was Andrea Yates evil, or was she insane? When she was led into the room, she looked small, almost fragile, her hair pulled back, her hands folded in front of her. The world expected a monster. What they saw was a pale, exhausted woman whose eyes were fixed on the floor. She did not weep. She did not look up. The prosecution wasted no time painting a portrait of cold calculation. She waited until her husband left for work, the district attorney told the jury. She filled the tub by one and then called 911. That is not confusion. That is premeditation. They emphasized her composure, her ability to recount the events clearly. To them, this was evidence that she knew what she had done was wrong. But the defense countered with a story that chilled the courtroom in a different way. Her attorney, George Parnham, called psychiatrists who had examined Andrea extensively. One by one, they described a mind torn apart by postpartum psychosis, a psychotic break so deep that she had lost all connection to reality. Dr. Philip Resnick testified that Andrea believed she was saving her children's souls from eternal damnation. She thought it was the only way to protect them from Satan, he said. In her mind, this was not murder, it was salvation. The jury listened as experts described the weeks before the killings, how she had stopped her medication, how she had been left alone despite repeated warnings, how she had been pacing, muttering about punishment and redemption. Rusty Yates took the stand, voice breaking, saying, "She loved those children. She loved them more than herself. She was sick. I should have seen it." Still, not everyone was willing to accept that explanation. The prosecution called its own expert, who insisted Andrea had the presence of mind to plan the killings. They pointed to her ability to dial 911 and tell police exactly what she'd done. "That shows awareness," the prosecutor said. "And awareness is guilt." After weeks of testimony, the courtroom was divided. Outside, the public split into two camps: those who demanded punishment, and those who saw in her a warning about the system's failure to recognize mental illness. When the verdict was finally read, the silence was absolute. Andrea Yates was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Reporters scribbled furiously. The cameras clicked. Some cried out in relief, others in disbelief. Andrea showed no reaction. She simply whispered, "I'm sorry," to no one in particular. But the story didn't end there. 4 years later, a shocking revelation surfaced. The prosecution's key witness, a forensic psychiatrist, had given false testimony, claiming Andrea had been inspired by a fictional crime scene from television. The scene he cited didn't exist. The entire foundation of premeditation collapsed. In 2006, Andrea Yates was granted a retrial. This time, the jury listened to the full medical history, every hospitalization, every psychotic episode, every cry for help ignored. They saw the pattern of delusion, the illness that blurred her reality until she no longer recognized her own children as human, but as souls in peril. After 3 weeks, the new verdict came: not guilty by reason of insanity. The judge ordered that Andrea be committed indefinitely to a high-security psychiatric hospital in Kerrville, Texas. She would not walk free, not because she was dangerous, but because her mind could never fully return to the world outside. As the gavel fell, a strange quiet filled the courtroom. Justice had been served in a way few could agree on. Rusty Yates sat motionless, his eyes closed, tears slipping silently down his face. Outside, the cameras asked again, who was Andrea Yates? A mother? A murderer? Or something that didn't fit either word? The law had given its answer, but for everyone watching, the truth was far less certain. Years have passed since that summer morning in 2001, yet the name Andrea Yates still drifts like a ghost through America's collective memory. The house in Clear Lake has long been sold. New families have moved in, their children laughing where 5 others once lived. The street is quiet again, but the silence feels different now, heavier, as if it remembers. Inside a state psychiatric hospital in Kerrville, Texas, Andrea lives in a small, white-walled room. Her days are regimented medication, therapy, group sessions, the occasional walk through the garden. Nurses describe her as gentle, polite, compliant. She paints sometimes, mostly landscapes with no people in them. She rarely talks about that morning, though sometimes, during therapy, she whispers that she prays for her children every night. She still believes they are in heaven. She has refused every offer of release or transfer. The doctors say she is stable, but Andrea herself insists she should never be free. "I can't," she once told a psychiatrist. "Babies, I belong here." Rusty Yates eventually rebuilt his life, though the scars never healed. He remarried for a time, divorced, and continued to speak publicly about postpartum depression and psychosis, urging others to seek help before tragedy could repeat itself. In interviews, his voice often trembled when he spoke of Andrea. "She wasn't evil," he said quietly. "She was sick. I forgive her." The Yates case forced America to confront an uncomfortable truth that mental illness can destroy not only the mind, but the soul of a family, and that society often notices only when it's too late. In its wake, hospitals began screening new mothers more carefully. Legislation was drafted to expand mental health care, and awareness campaigns emerged across the country. Yet for every Andrea Yates who becomes a headline, there are countless others suffering in silence, unseen and untreated. The tragedy of Andrea Yates endures because it unsettles our deepest instincts, the belief that a mother's love is pure, that faith is unshakable, that home is always safe. Her story tears at all of those illusions, leaving behind only a haunting question: how fragile is the boundary between devotion and destruction? Sometimes, Darkness does not arrive as a stranger at the door. Sometimes it grows quietly in the heart of someone who once only wanted to do good. And as the world moves on, the echoes of that bathtub morning linger, a reminder that beneath the surface of ordinary lives, unseen storms can still rise without warning. Because sometimes the most terrifying crimes are not born from hatred, but from love twisted by despair.